Hi all, this is Shashikla from Litreal, welcoming you all for the sixth episode of Essential Reads. Before we get into the core of the event, let me give you a brief introduction about Litreal. Litreal is an online course provider exclusively for English literature, and I'm immensely happy to announce that we have reached 2,000 subscribers in our YouTube channel. I'm highly grateful to all the viewers who have been of great support to us right from the beginning. So, today we have with us Katie Bowles from New Zealand. She is a best selling teen and women's author. She is known for her wonderful writing. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
How do you do?
Thank you for inviting me.
It's our honor to have you with us today.
Thank you.
I'll be glad if you could give a brief introduction to our viewers about yourself.
I've been reading and writing since I was 3. My mum actually taught me to read and write before I went to school. And so I showed up at school already able to read and write. And I was that irritating child that refused to learn phonetics or to speak what I called was baby talk. My mother was always getting notes home. Kate refuses to, write stuff a snake. It was no, it's S. And so I was reading really early and writing my own stories. So when I was a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry, and it's how I filtered a lot of my thoughts and put my world in order just through expressing, through writing. And then I went to university. I did an English literature degree, which I absolutely loved. I went to Wales to be taught English by an American and a Scotsman. So that was a wonderful variation on a theme. And then I left university and went straight into law enforcement. So I didn't even use my degree for many years. And I've done lots of different jobs and told my children stories. I would actually verbally tell them stories when they'd finished their dinner and, maybe they wanted to be naughty. I would just tell them a story and they would all be captivated. But I didn't start publishing until after we emigrated to New Zealand. And I think I published my first book in 2013. And so I've got over 30 books now in numerous genres. I keep mixing and matching, but I always come back to mystery. So
it's almost 8 years now you have been in this profession as a writer.
Yes. And since 2017, I've been full-time writing.
That's the time when you could set aside your family responsibilities a bit, sit back and take your time for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. My husband still feeds and clothes me when I don't earn enough, though. So.
We all know that you are fond of reading and writing chick lit and women's mysteries. What made you develop a kind of interest in this genre especially?
I will read absolutely anything, from sci-fi, fantasy. I'll read anything. But whenever I sit down to write something, it always comes back to strong female characters and some kind of mystery or suspense thread. I can't seem to leave those things behind. I think probably the investigative mind makes me want to unravel things and build things up and then pick through them and lay, breadcrumbs and things like that. So that's what's caught me in the mystery and the chick lit genres and held me there, I think.
So your inquisitive mind has really done a great job in making you a writer.
Yeah.
And born to soldiering parents and raised in the British Royal Air Force, was it in a very strict family environment that you grew? Can you tell us something about your childhood days?
Yeah, so I grew up on air bases in England and in what was then West Germany during the Cold War. My father was a fireman in the Royal Air Force, and it's very much a community and very insular. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and sometimes even what you're thinking. And so that was quite difficult. It's also a very transient community. So when the father moved, because at that time the serving personnel were the men. My mum actually was in the Women's Royal Air Force, but as soon as she got married, she had to leave. You weren't allowed to stay in as a female serving officer once you were married. So when the fathers moved, the children moved, and we didn't discuss anything with each other at school. You wouldn't say, oh, we're going back to England next week. You just didn't discuss it. And so I would make friends, and then I'd show up at school and they'd be gone. And it was never discussed where they went, just that they were gone. And so it was actually quite difficult to make and keep friendships and maintain relationships. And there was no internet, there was no mobile phones. So when they were gone, and you didn't know where they were gone, and you had no idea how to find out, how to recontact them. That was one of the downsides of being in that environment. But the upside of that was my dad would occasionally look after my sister and I, and he would take us to work with him, which was just amazing, to go onto this RAF base. And the fire station was always the furthest away from every other building because it was in the middle of the complex of runways. And so my sister and I would persuade my dad to take our little bicycles, and he'd shove them in the boot of his car. And then as soon as we got to the fire station, we'd get on our bikes and we were gone. And so we would just ride for miles on these huge runways with these massive planes flying overhead and landing. And so from that point of view, we had a lot of freedom in our upbringing. I mean, I learned to ride my bike on a runway in West Germany, and I don't think as many people can say that they did that.
So your childhood days, the description of it makes us understand what the writer in you exactly. We are able to perceive it. The way you described it, it was really that effective that you are able to visualize what you are trying to narrate. That's awesome. And
Thank you.
Has any other anecdote from your personal life been the plot of any of your novels?
Yeah, I think I write scenes from my own experience. I think they're a snapshot of things that have happened to me. And a lot of the scenes involving children, they're my children. I know that, they know that, they're horrified at some of the things that I've shared about them. Especially my son was very funny and very precocious. And so there's a scene in Artifact where the main character goes to help a friend who's a teacher in a primary school. And she goes to help her with this art lesson. And it's an absolute disaster. There are children with paintings, they've sat on them and they're stuck to their bottoms. And, everybody needs the toilet at the same time. And those are the kind of scenes that people have said they just laughed and laughed, but they don't realize that it's the truth. Like, they are things that I experienced in schools just helping. They filled me with horror, but other people seemed quite delighted to read them.
So this realistic experience being put in the form of words would have reached your viewers, your readers, the best way possible, I believe. Can you tell us something about your character Sophia Armitage in your novel, Free from the Tracks? What made you teenify the book? Is it your personal teenage life?
So part of it is the school that I went to in the UK was a really unsafe place to be. It was an inner city school, and it was actually very dangerous. And I spent 5 years sort of trying to get educated, but also learning how to avoid trouble, how to anticipate trouble, how to stay out of trouble, really. And I hadn't wanted to write teen books. That wasn't something I'd ever planned to do. And then my daughter, who is Sophia, that's actually her name, she said to me, write a book for me. She was about 14. And I thought, well, I'm not really sure how, how to do that. I've read teen books, but I'm not convinced that I'd be able to pull it off. So I said to her, well, I'll write one chapter, and if you like it, I'll decide whether to carry on. So I spent ages. I wrote this chapter, and I got it all together, and then I gave it to her, and she said, oh, all right, then I'll read it. And she came back to me about half an hour later, and she said, yeah, I want the whole book. So that turned into a 4-book series of Sophia Armitage's school life from year 12 to kind of leaving and going up to university. And then book 3 was 2 of her friends, which I bought in for A Trail of Lies.
So involving your family a bit in your professional life would be really interesting, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any real-time characters in your mind when you sketched the character of Yama, a single mother, and the hardships in your novel, The Actuary?
So that housing estate that Emma lives on actually is the housing estate that my mother grew up on, and which we still used to visit when I was first growing up. And although a lot of the characters are invented by me, there are shades of people that lived on that estate. So when we came back from West Germany, we'd have to drive to Zeebrugge, catch the ferry overnight, arrive in Dover in the very early hours of the morning, and then we would drive to my nan's house, which was in Dover on this housing estate. And I remember we got there really early one morning and it was still dark, and my dad said, we can't knock on the door and wake everybody up, so we'll just sleep in the car. And we were sleeping in the car, and we were woken up. Someone was hammering on the driver's window. So my dad cranked the window down and said, yes, can I help you? And it was this man, and he was, who are you? We watched you drive on. What do you want here? And then he recognized my mother, and he said, oh, it's you. Oh, hello, welcome back. And, oh, you're all good. You can stay there. Don't worry. And then we waited until it was light, and we went in and kind of knocked on the door, and my grandparents welcomed us in. But that's really stuck in my mind. And so that man is actually the guy who is known on the housing estate as Fat Brian, and he controls everything that comes on and off the estate, including whether people can come on and off, post, drugs, any of that stuff. He controls the entire housing estate as an homage to that man who banged on our window in the early hours of a morning.
So as a writer, you have an eye for almost everything you see and everybody you meet, and that becomes a part of your novel.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? And everything, everybody can be put into a book, into a character. Often it's not just one character. There'll be one character's form will have lots of different nuances of different people in it. The only person I've ever completely replicated as they are is my dad, who actually asked me to do that. That was his 70th birthday present. He was a character in one of my books, and so it's actually his name and his character.
Okay. Your novels mostly have the background and setting set in New Zealand. Being a dual citizen of Britain and New Zealand, what made you prefer New Zealand to Britain?
I think it's fresh in my mind because I'm here. Some of the series, though, Artifact is set in the town that we were in before we emigrated, and the Actuary series is based also in that town. When I first started writing and publishing, we were very new immigrants in New Zealand, and it was quite an isolating experience because my husband went out and found a job, my children went to school, and I found part-time work. But then I would come home to an empty house, and we didn't own anything. We didn't own any furniture. We didn't bring anything with us. And so I would just sit in the middle of the lounge floor with a laptop, and I just started typing. And So that's where the character of Hana Du Rose came from. Is she's also an English immigrant, but she's further down the line. So she had been in New Zealand longer than my actual self. New Zealand is a really vibrant place to write about. There's just so much here, beyond just the mountains and the beaches and all the wonderful natural things about New Zealand. It's very multicultural, the different influences, and also a very young country still. So it's quite fascinating to write about. I'll think, I might write this, and then I start delving into it and uncover this whole other world it's a bit of a research rabbit hole if I'm not careful.
So actually, I have seen New Zealand only when I watch a cricket match. I hope to visit New Zealand soon, because the way you tell it, we feel that the atmosphere and the settings there would be really worth a visit.
Yeah, definitely. You've obviously been watching the cricket from Seddon Park in Hamilton.
Yeah. You have stuffed your novel artifact with intrigue, mystery, love, and a story of redemption. What would you like to share to your audience about the making of the novel?
So that novel, I actually woke up one morning with a sentence in my head, and it was, "She didn't mean to steal it." And that was all I began with. And so as time progressed, it was, okay, well, who's she? What did she steal? And what is it? And the novel sort of unraveled from there. And it became the character of Lara, who had stolen an artifact from an employer in New Zealand. And she was English. She had run home to England and managed to smuggle this artifact through customs, and then hidden it under the stairs in her aunt's house. And it becomes about her feeling guilt about this, but you don't know at the beginning why she felt that she needed to steal it. And so you begin the novel feeling that maybe she's in the wrong, maybe she's a thief. And as the book progresses, you find out more, and it brings in the people around her, and she's basically looking for redemption, and so are a lot of the other characters in the novel. So that's how it began, and that's how it evolved.
So the core of a novel is just in a sentence which you have elaborated and made it into a novel, right?
Yeah. It's one of those things, once I get a hook, it's really hard to let it go. Like, it just eats and eats at me until I've either written it or dismissed it. But yeah, that one was I think I wrote that one fairly quickly, actually. I think I wrote that one in a couple of months.
Okay. What other authors are you friends with, and how do they help you become a better writer?
There's a huge online writing community that sprung up in the last 8 years. It was quite a lonely industry at first, but Facebook is a real hub for especially craft courses and masterclasses and things like that. One author that I became friends with through one of those Facebook groups is Amber Dalcourt, and we've actually never met, but we talk most days. She's in Canada and I'm in New Zealand, so we hold each other accountable, actually. So if I've written nothing, I'll have to admit it to her, because I know she's waiting to hear from me, and vice versa. So it's really good to have an accountability partner that keeps you honest. So I might say I've written 3,000 words, and then she's like, "Oh, I should probably get on with it then," or vice versa. We've beta read for each other. I've edited one of her books. If she hears about something really, like there's an amazing, bestseller craft course, she'll tell me about it, and I do the same for her. And I think there's a few of us who connect that way. It'll be easier when things open up and we can actually start going back to the expos and the book fairs and those kind of things when, COVID's over and we can all get back to normal.
That's nice to know from your side. Penning your thoughts is not that easy, but certain things you cannot stop writing when it comes to your mind. What would
No.
you describe as the hardest scene that you have ever written, and why was it that very difficult?
So I wrote a scene in the Hana Du Rose Mysteries in book 5, which is One Heartbeat. And Hannah has been friends with an old Catholic priest for the entirety of the series, and he dies in that book. And I wrote this scene that was really upsetting, actually, where she goes to see him for the last time. And it coincided with a friend of mine who he had motor neurone disease, and I thought he was going to be around for a lot longer. And the last time I saw him, he said, "You know that we won't see each other again, don't you?" And it came as a terrible shock because I didn't realise, he was up and walking about, and it was the truth. I didn't see him again. So I found that scene. I knew I had to write it, and I kept putting it off, and I kept going round it. So I'd fast forward in my manuscript, and I'd write the next bit, and I think I need to write this, and no, I can't do that yet. And then and I think I actually got all the way to the end of the book before I could got a face going back and actually writing that scene.
So every writer has their own obstacle in that way.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. The Hana Du Rose Mysteries series has 10 novels. What gave you the idea to make it a series? Was it your unstoppable flow of thought?
The first book was enormous. It was actually over 500,000 words. And it was in the days where when you first uploaded it to Amazon, they wanted me to pay them to deliver it to people because it was so huge. And so they suggested I split it up into 3 books, which is what I did. Obviously, things have changed and moved on technologically now. And so I've been able to put those back into a single box set again, but it is enormous. And then I thought at the end of the 3rd book that I was done. I thought that's it. That's nice. Everything was all rounded off and all finished. And then I started getting the emails. So what's next for the Du Roses? Is there anything else? What's happening next? What about Hannah? And I realized that people wanted to hear more. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just put out one more. So I put that one more out, and then the same thing again. And before I knew it, I was up to book 9. Book 10 has done a little bit of a fast forward to the next generation, to the children of the Du Roses. But I'm aware now that I need to go back and fill in some more gaps, because people are saying, oh, it's really nice to hear about Phoenix, but I'm still missing Logan. What's happening with Logan? So I will probably just write 1 a year for the rest of my life.
That's nice to know from your side. Yeah, you want to keep on adding to that series, I believe.
And people are quite readers are quite strict about it. I'm not allowed to kill Logan or Hannah. I can kill everybody else, but not them.
So the character is immortalized by that way.
Yeah, definitely. People there's just something about Logan Du Rose. They just absolutely love him.
Okay. Emotions play a vital role in writing a novel. When you start writing, how do you emotionally connect yourself with the novel and thereby get connected with the readers? How does that happen? How do you make it happen?
Yeah, I'm quite an empathetic person. So it's like a whole other language when you can see what someone is feeling. I think in the early days, I did a little bit too much tell rather than show. And that's a craft thing, is learning how to show the emotion without saying he was angry. And that's kind of come along as a progression of improving your craft. People love the characters, and that's one of the things that they say is they feel that they were there. They feel that they were standing next to them. Some of the emotions of the characters, I think, are just naturally mine and naturally absorbed from people around me.
Can you just share with us some of the life experiences that have shaped your writing the most?
Probably motherhood has been the most influential because I've done so many jobs which do creep in. I've done everything from law enforcement to, cleaning toilets and all that. There's a place for that. But yeah, I think motherhood and especially emigrating with 4 small children has been, when I look back and I just think, how did we do that? We had a suitcase each and a one-way plane ticket, and we'd never even been here on holiday. So we just climbed on the plane and arrived here, and we didn't have jobs, we didn't have anywhere to live. And I look back now and I just think, wow, that's just crazy. Who would do that? And so for me, it forces you to be either one thing or another. It really polarizes you because it's both exciting and absolutely terrifying. And so you find out pretty quickly what your level is and who you are. And that just naturally comes across in your books. So Hannah is an immigrant from the UK. And so I was able to lend her my experience, but also just the emigration and being a parent. There's a sense of, there's a sense of determination. I think I was either going to have died of old age or joined the UN by the time I'd finished having children, because I was just an amazing peacekeeper, just from sorting out their disputes. And I think you become everything, don't you? Doctor, teacher, peacekeeper. So all those experiences just naturally just filter through in your books.
With 4 kids to take care of and in a completely new land, Katie, you have established yourself as a great writer. That is amazing, unbelievable actually. Because having a single child and taking care of it itself involves so much of responsibilities. That is what I feel on my side. With 4 kids and having your own time, in that case, your family should have supported you much. Does your family support your career as a writer? As a woman, how do you balance between your professional and domestic life?
You're right, it is a balance. It's a balancing act. It's not one that I think I've got right all the time. When I want to write, I want to write. I don't want to stop to eat. I definitely don't want to stop to vacuum. And I think there were probably many times when the children were living at home that I got that wrong. And for most of it, obviously, until 2017, I was working as well. I worked as a part-time archivist, taking care of a private collection in an archives department and running the department. So I look back then and I think, gosh, where did I find the time to actually write? I think I was probably more productive when I was pushed than I maybe am now, because I couldn't just stop and stare out the window and think, oh, isn't that cloud lovely? It looks like a rabbit. I was on to the next thing. So in terms of support, so my mum has read everything I've ever written, and sometimes she wants it as I write it, so a chapter a day. My dad, as I said earlier, is actually in one of the books. He asked to be a character in the book. My husband is my unpaid technical support. So if anything goes wrong with the computer or the laptop, I'll kind of walk into wherever he is, sort of holding this pitiful broken thing, and he'll have to fix it. And my children, now that they're grown and they've all got university degrees and PhDs, and they're all clever people, and I'll ask for their support in terms of research. So I actually asked them when I knew I was doing this, so what are the questions that I've asked you? Are there any strange questions that I've asked you? And so my youngest daughter is in the medical field, and apparently I've asked her, if I stab the victim in the neck with a pair of scissors, how long will it take them to die? And I asked her that, and her answer was, don't do it, strangle them first. So that was her response. Too much blood if you stab someone in the scissors with the scissors. And my son is ex-military, so I ask him all the ballistics questions. He knows the answer to what gun and how far the shot can go and what damage it'll do and all those kind of things. So yeah, I'm really fortunate in the level of support that they give me. Two of my daughters have read my books. One of them is a beta reader for me, so she'll point out if there's anything wrong. She'll see it first and stop it going to press with some terrible glaring error in it.
So the whole family has backed you up and traveled along with you in your journey as a writer.
Yeah, definitely. And I see writing as me leaving a legacy, because there'll be a copyright on this, on everything that I've written for 70 years after my death. So it's kind of their problem, really, isn't it?
What things have you learned about life and the human condition from being a writer? Do you incorporate this learning in your writings too?
Yeah, I think you look at people differently. So we're quite predatory as writers. We're hunters, really. I can sit in a cafe and just people watch and make up stories in my head for who these people are and where they might be going and what they might be doing. I think I've learned that most people can be redeemed. There's restoration for everybody. It doesn't matter how bad you are or how far down the wrong path you've gone. It's never too late to turn around and come back and redeem yourself. And that's something that's in my books. All of my worst characters, I'd like to think I gave them at least one redeeming factor.
So it's a kind of a purgation.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just so curious to know this, and I couldn't stop from asking this question. What is the weirdest thing a fan has ever done for you?
I saw that question and I thought about it, and my fans tend to be really respectable people. They're the kinds of people who, if I broke down on the expressway in the rain, I could call them and they'd come and give me a tow. They're very respectable people. The sweetest thing that someone's done is I did a public event at a library about an hour away from here, and there were all these strangers in the room, and one of my fans had driven down there to actually sit and support me and proceeded to tell everyone how wonderful my books were. That's the sweetest thing. The weirdest thing, probably the most unusual thing, is a teenage reader actually left a video review on Amazon. No one's ever done that before. It was actually like a talking head of her saying what she thought of my book. That's probably the most unusual thing anyone's ever done.
You would have enjoyed every bit of contribution that has been made by your fans, actually, right?
Yeah, definitely.
This is a general question. I just want to know about your opinion here. What is your opinion on love at first sight? Do you believe in it?
That's an interesting question. I actually met my husband, and that was actually love at first sight. Definitely on my part, although on his part, I had actually broken a computer, and not just the computer at work. I broke the entire network. And I worked for the local county council, and they had to shut the building and send everybody home. And he was a student on a placement, and he had to come and fix it. So, yeah, I thought he was wonderful. But at the time, I don't think he thought I was very wonderful at all. And then I did the same thing a month later and broke the whole thing again. And so he had to come and fix it again. And he said, I've earned so much overtime from you. I should probably take you to lunch. And yeah, I thought he was absolutely wonderful. And so we were engaged 5 weeks later, and we were married 5 months after we actually met. And we've been married for 30 years. So, yeah, I think love at first sight is definitely true.
Actually, breaking it, was it to make him come and meet you again? Was it intentionally done, or it happened to be so?
No, I'm just a complete technophobe. It was a complete accident, and because I didn't know how I'd done it the first time, I managed to do it again the second time. I'm always doing things like that. So yeah, he spent the last 30 years repairing the same things over and over again.
Naming characters in your novels would be a bit difficult because you have so many characters in your real life, and bringing them in your books, is that the way you do it, or you Google and find names for your characters?
They often come to me with names. So some of them have names that I've never come across. So Hana Du Rose, she actually came with a name. And she began, I was driving home from this part-time job I had, and I saw a lady with bright red curly hair, and she was standing at a bus stop, and she'd been wearing high-heeled shoes, and it was a really hot day, and she just took her stiletto heels off, and she just had them in her hand. And I carried on driving up the road, and that's where the character of Hannah came from, was just this lady I just saw at a bus stop. But I knew instantly that her name was Hannah, and it's spelt in a really unusual way, Hana. And it wasn't until 6 years later I went to a class learning Te Reo Māori, and I came across the word Hannah, and it actually means fire. So the fact that she's a redhead and her name means fire, and she just came to me with that name, was quite, when I learned that, it was like, wow, I couldn't have done that if I'd have wanted to, because I didn't know any Te Reo Māori back then. For the fantasy trilogy I wrote, that was a little harder because those characters didn't come with names, and fantasy, you expect them to be called really weird and unusual things. So what I did was I got a map of the local area, and some of the names are actually place names backwards. So the character of Limar is Hamilton backwards. But I couldn't have the O-N, otherwise his name would have been No Limar. And I couldn't have that, so I had to chop off the on, so it's Hamel backwards. And another one is called Kuiti, and that's after the place name Tekuiti, which means narrow in Māori. And he is a really narrow-minded person, so I thought that fitted really well.
So you have taken so much effort to name your characters. It's as if you are trying hard to name your children, right?
Yeah, it was definitely easier to name the children.
Have you read anything that made you think differently about fiction?
Yeah, the first Agatha Christie novel I ever read was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And I don't want to give any spoilers if anybody hasn't read it, but you don't find out until the very last page that the narrator did it. The narrator is the murderer. And I was carried along all the way through this novel, just, gripped and on the edge of my seat. And it's not until that very last minute that you realize that you as the reader have been set up. That the narrator that was telling you the story the whole way through, they did it. They're the killer, and you had no idea. And they've deliberately led you wrong all the way through. And so I just thought that was amazing. I thought I would never, ever be able to replicate that or do anything as clever as that. So, yeah, that was a real eye-opener for me that, that someone could write a book that was so clever.
A great writer complimenting another writing is real credit, right? Okay, so what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
I tend to research as I go, because I'm one of those people who could just lose myself in an internet rabbit hole. I could begin by researching, how to stab someone through the neck with a pair of scissors, and 4 hours later I've ordered, wallpaper for the kitchen or something. So I have to really limit how much research I do and for how long, in terms of not allowing myself to go down just endlessly research for research's sake. If I'm writing and I feel like that might happen, I will just put asterisks and carry on and go back and research it when I feel like I'm able to control it. Google is really good. There are Facebook groups and other social media groups where you can ask just about anything and someone knows the answer. Writers, detectives is a really good Facebook group. And I think one question I asked there was, if I pushed someone off a balcony, I want them to die. So if I push them off a balcony, how high does the balcony have to be in order to make sure that they die? Will the balcony come away from the wall and go with them? And how would the body land? And I asked that in the writers' detectives group, and there were paramedics and coroners and detectives and all sorts of engineers, and they sorted it all out for me. And we decided that the balcony could come away from the wall a little bit. One screw could pop, but basically he needed to go over backwards and land.
That was an elaborate answer to make us understand. Can you tell us about your passion for folk art and renovating wooden furniture? It seems to be a bit odd and different from your regular thing.
Yeah, so it's still part of creation, I think. I mean, my passion at school was actually art and landscape painting, but I wasn't quite good enough to get into art college. And so I went and I did English, which I'd very much taken for granted. I never had to work awfully hard at English. It was just always there for me. And then in later life, you buy furniture and you can't afford the thing you want. You end up with the kind of third-hand thing that you can afford. And I realized fairly quickly that I could paint it and make it look like the thing I wanted with a little bit of work. I bought this to show you. So this is a block of wood that was cut off of a post. And so it's just an ordinary block of wood, and I painted it and I made some books on my shelf.
That's awesome. That's fantastic to look at.
Yeah. So I just, for me, that's, if I'm thinking something through, it's a way of relaxing. So I'm doing that and I'm not necessarily thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just producing something, and it leaves that other part of my brain free to think about, what horrible thing I'm going to do to that character, or how I'm going to, get out of the corner that I've kind of managed to put myself in when I'm writing.
That's nice to know, Katie. Let's move on to the final question. If you had to do something differently as a child or a teenager to become a better writer as an adult, what would you have done? What would you do?
I would work at it. I would work harder at school at my craft rather than just relying on what seemed to come naturally. So I would get straight A's in English and I would take it for granted. And so as an adult, I've had to go back and I've had to improve my craft, and I've had to learn things and unlearn bad habits and other things. And I wish that I had done that back then. I wish when I had all these really talented people around me that I'd actually mined them for the information that I need now, which is why what you're doing is so amazing with providing these online courses and actually giving people the opportunity to build their craft and produce something really amazing, instead of having to do the producing and then go back and relearn and rewrite and do all those terrible things that I've had to do.
You have so much to share about reliving your teenage and your childhood. That's nice to know. So, with this segment, with this question, we put an end to this segment and we move on to the most interesting and much awaited segment called the rapid fire. This rapid fire segment is something where you'll be asked a series of questions. See to it that you give us brief answers,
Yeah.
and it'll be really interesting if you're going to be as frank as possible.
Okay.
So let's move on to the rapid fire section. What do you wish you had asked about more?
Oh, gosh, that's a hard question. Probably grammar.
Who do you look up as a model for handling fame and celebrity?
Oh, Nicole Kidman.
When was the last time you were able to go unrecognized and just be yourself?
Oh, yesterday in the garden centre.
If you had to switch places with another famous person, who would you switch places with?
Oh, Claudia Schiffer. I think she looks amazing.
What would you like to be remembered about you?
Probably, I'd love to be thought of as a good mother. I'd have to ask my children that one.
What do you think as your superpower?
Oh, being able to fix things.
Which fictional character would be the most exciting to meet in real life?
Ursula from D.H. Lawrence.
What's the weirdest question you have ever been asked?
Someone asked me, would I know you? And I didn't know how to answer that.
So that's it, Katie. You made it really interesting. Thank you. And now it is time for us to get connected with our YouTube viewers. You have questions from them? Let's go ahead with that. One second, Katie. I'm just going through it.
Okay.
It's a question from Shankar. Do you try to incorporate elements of folk art into your works?
Not folk art, but I have included when I learned Harakiki Raranga, which is Māori weaving, and I have written a segment in one of the Hana books where she's trying to weave something. She's trying to weave a basket, and all of her difficulties are very much mine. Not with folk art. Actually, I brought this. So this was a painting I did that was actually, it's quite folk arty. And that was the cover of one of my books for a long time until I actually got a professional cover made for it. But yeah, that was the house that featured in the novel.
That's a fantastic piece of art you have done. And we have another question from Cindy F. Rella. Would you say that some of your characters reflect you as a person? And how do you make it work both for your reason and yourself, for your readers and yourself?
A lot of people have said to me, am I Hannah? Or is Hannah me? And I didn't think she was, but I think there are probably a lot of my traits that have carried through to her. I think naturally when you think a certain way or you have a certain opinion, you can't help but to put it on your character. But I think the secret is to not be preachy with it, to not kind of drum it home, because not everybody wants to hear it.
And we have another question from Nanda. How do you integrate artistic flavor in your publications?
I think because writing is creating in the same way as art, it's the same process, it's the same soul searching, digging deep. The character, so the work I've got in progress at the moment, the working title is Jack, and he actually is an artist, and I'm really enjoying writing his story because it actually goes into quite a lot about acrylic painting and oil painting. So, but that's the first time that I've actually written about an artist.
Thank you, Katie. Here is another question from Yogesh Murugan. Writing is constantly evolving. Has the pandemic altered your writing process as a whole?
As the what, sorry?
I repeat the question from Mr. Murugan. Yeah. Writing is constantly evolving. Has the pandemic altered your writing process as a whole?
I think, yeah. So I think everything affects your process and how you produce the finished piece of work. And so external influences will always come into play. So what things that people tell me, things that they feel, how my work affects them, has an outworking in the next novel, whether I like it or not.
Thank you, Katie. Another question from Kevin Calloway. Has chick lit evolved as a genre?
Say that again.
Has chick lit evolved as a genre?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think it's going to continue because women want to read more about other strong women. And I thought my chick lit books would have attracted only a female audience, but I have men who also read them and enjoy them. So I think there is a hunger for women who have the ability to operate with their own mind, and don't necessarily, it doesn't always have to be about, love, falling in love. One of my series, the Curly Fan Club series, she has no interest in getting married, having children and settling down. She's just living her life the way that she wants to. And I think that's a real quality of chick lit in that, women don't always have to be allied to strong men in order to be someone.
Thank you, Katie. And Cindy Rella has another question to ask you. Is there a character you hated writing but had to because they evolve by themselves in the story and you can't just take them out?
Yeah, probably Hana Du Rose. I really didn't like him. He embodied all the really horrid men that I've ever met in my life, and I just put them into this one really difficult character. But then the trouble with my nature is because I am always looking for restoration, I found myself then looking for excuses for him as to why he was the way he was, and kind of mitigating for him and trying to make him into a really good person. And so I had to keep reminding myself, no, he's really bad. We don't like him.
I think this would be the last question, and it's also from Rella. Is there anything you find hard to write about?
Yeah, I definitely, I don't struggle with the concept of my own death. I don't have a problem with that at all, but I do have a real dislike of letting other people go. And so when I wrote Father Sinbad's death, I found that really, really difficult because I put myself into it. I know how I would feel. I know how I would react. I know what grief feels like. And so it was actually quite difficult to put that into words and then to send it out to kind of make other people miserable as well once they read it.
Thank you, Katie. I'll be happy if you could speak a few words to the audience about your experience as a writer, or some message that you ought to communicate to them.
Yeah, I think it's about seizing your opportunities. So like with your courses, you know, they're there and they're there now. So seize the opportunities to really grow your craft and to feed it. Writing is an organic thing. And if you don't use it, you will find it harder to go back to. I had a gap of 20 years where I verbally told stories, but I didn't write them down. And it's quite difficult to go back and to start again. I think if you have the dream of wanting to write and be a writer, then just do it. Do it, work with what you get. And, you know, things can be edited, things can be improved, but if you never actually do it and get it down on paper, then there's nothing to show for those, you know, those hopes and dreams that you have.
That was indeed a great message to the YouTube viewers. Thank you for being with us, Katie. You have spent your time, you have really taken efforts to explain each and every question that was asked to you. And you have been energetic throughout the session with a beautiful smile on your face. You have been answering it. Thank you for being with Litreal.
Thank you for having me.
So viewers, Litreal is proud and happy to have had a wonderful interview with Katie, and we'd like to tell you something more. We have a webinar on 23rd of April. It's going to be a fantastic event. I hope your support for us will be with us throughout. Join us again for each and every event in Litreal Broadcast. And Litreal has launched its website. It is litreal.in. It has got so many things stuffed in it for real literature enthusiasts. You could have fun learning literature there. Visit our website and make the most of it. Thank you. Bye-bye.